Get going here.
Go ahead. So I had mentioned the fact that this was part of a longer class that was being offered in Atlanta. I'll just wrap that up with the normal comments about Sal's background. He does this work with the group in Atlanta called SUGA, Senior University of Greater Atlanta. He's worked with the senior lifelong learning groups at Emory University, Kennesaw State University, where he's taught history classes. Sal holds an MS in criminal justice from the University of South Carolina and an MBA from Mercer University. He's also taught at Georgia State University and at Texas A&M. So how are we doing over there now, Sal?
Well, we're getting close. So
Okay.
Let me get this set up here. And let me get this lined up here.
What we typically do, just for
Okay.
everybody's information, is we get online 15 minutes before the class starts to test everything out. And we were there and we were testing. It was a little slow. So we decided to do the reboot. And hopefully this will solve the problem.
Yeah, I'm sorry, everybody. Every morning before a class, I check to see if there are any updates coming so I could get them all done long before class. And I had everything lined up and ready to go. And as we were getting, a few minutes before class, everything was sticking. I couldn't get any commands, clicks to work. So I had to restart the computer, and now we're here. So I'm sorry for all that, but blame Bill Gates or somebody like that.
So I'm seeing your screen really well. I'm sure you know that you're in your notes view, but it's coming across well.
Okay, and let me just, while we have that, let me check one more thing to see that the sound is right. Share that.
Even now, the invasion has
Sounds great.
Okay.
carried on the lowly backs of small stowaways.
Oh,
So if it's not very loud on your end, people, make sure you turn your device's volume up, but it's coming in well, Sal.
okay. Well, we should be okay from here, I hope. You never know what technology will bring your way. Let's see. There we go. Okay, well, this is the last in our series of 4 classes, and I wanted to bring us up to, just kind of review where we are in the sequence of events, because I'm bringing us now into the 14th century. Remember, we started 200,000 years ago, and now we're up to the 14th century, and this is 100 years before Columbus. Over 100 years before Columbus. And I want to talk about the Black Plague. And this wasn't the first Black Plague, but in my view, it's the most significant, and it has major implications for the development of the world, and certainly in the history of the United States. So what we talked about is 10,000 years ago, our species transitions from hunter-gatherer to agriculture and pastoralist, where we have animal husbandry. And this is a huge change in the human existence. Prior to that, we lived off of nuts and berries and the food that we would hunt, and we were a nomadic organism that would travel from spot to spot wherever the herds took us, wherever weather drove us. And I don't want to describe that in too idyllic terms. Yes, there were conflicts between people, and yes, there was fighting, and there was brutality. Life was not easy because you could go for periods of time without food. It was a struggle for existence. But we lived in a world where it was egalitarian. Everybody had a part to play. Everyone had a role within their community. And whoever, and it was truly a meritocracy, because whoever was the best hunter got to hunt. And people, and there were tasks for everyone. So everybody has a sense of contributing to the society. And this is a point in time before we have ideas about possessions, about political philosophies, even before we have religious thought, which we talked about last week. And I want to make clear about my points last week is not to say that I don't think God existed before Abraham introduced us to monotheism. God may have been around for the 4.6 billion years that our planet is here, or for the 16 billion years that the universe is here, or whatever, however long. My point is that within our species, there was not the idea of God as we think of God today. So it doesn't mean God didn't exist. It means the idea didn't exist within humans. And so what I wanted to highlight is that when we transition in the Neolithic period to agriculture and animal husbandry, we now discover possessions. We know how to create an excess of food, and that excess becomes wealth. And when someone who has gravitated into that life and becomes victimized by the vagaries of nature, be it flooding or drought or pestilence, and they were out of food and they needed food, my wealth becomes power because I have the ability to feed you. And out of that, we get warfare and we get slavery. And so that generates a whole nother aspect of the human existence. We create the protective edifice. This is the army, the police, the people who are going to protect my stuff from you coming and stealing it. And then as I grow that protective edifice and I look at others who are like me and I feel that they may threaten me, I can then use my protective edifice to attack them in a preemptive way, to say, I'm going to stop you before you get so big and can attack me. And if I win that fight, I get the spoils of war and I get to take your excess and add it to mine. And so this phenomenon of greed becomes a part of the human existence model. And what happens is those of great power, great armies, they start attacking each other and they build empires. And the first empire is the Akkadian Empire, 4,500 years ago. I think you can hear Lily in the background. Lily, calm down. That's my doggie. Maybe she'll be quiet now. And so what happens is they start building empires, and organically they could become thoughts that we're fighting and dying so that the emperor can get more stuff. This doesn't seem right. It's the ideas of morality. And mind you, ideas of morality didn't just start then, they started long before that. In fact, there are anthropologists and others, biologists, who look at our ancestors, the ape family, chimpanzees, bonobos. They evidence a sense of morality, a sense of compassion that for others in their world, long before we come into being. So the ideas of right and wrong precede us, but it certainly becomes a part of that world when we're fighting each other so that the emperor can get more stuff. And so these ideas of morality, they take shape and they become codified under monotheism and religion. What happens with Abraham when he introduces monotheism is that it no longer do you need to make sacrifices to the transactional pagan gods. Remember, what you would do is you would sacrifice something so that the pagan god would give us wind or rain or sun or fertility. Monotheism does away with that. It says we're not believing in multiple gods, we're believing in one God. And to serve this one God, it comes with a moral code. And of course, that will get redefined over a period of time. But that's 4,000 years. It's in blowback to the empire building. And so Abraham is followed by Moses, the Buddha, Confucius, Jesus, Muhammad, all coming with the same message. And why does it have to get repeated? Because greed continues to win out. And we will continue fighting wars and building empires. And Christendom gets to a point where it becomes a dominant force. But Abraham introduces those concepts. The Bible codifies it. It comes with stories of apocalypse to try to provide answers to what could be inexplicable. Then again, we come to Muhammad in the year 600. Just another 700 years later comes another major apocalypse. And what is that? That is the Black Plague. It is a disease that cannot be seen. It is a threat to human existence that no one can explain. And so people start thinking about the Bible and the threat of punishment, and it comes to be seen as this apocalypse that is upon us is because God is angry with us. And they're angry. Why is God angry? God is angry because the greedy, the emperors and the others have corrupted the leaders of religion who were supposed to be our contact with God. And so they become really angry. And it goes through a period of years. And again, no one can explain to them where this is coming from. So you have fear. This fear, as I said before, generates hate. And they hate each other. They hate the church. They're just terrified. And so it's important to understand that at this time, as religion has been around with its moral code, even though it becomes corrupted by the rich and powerful, it still has imposed certain constraints, guardrails upon what people can do. And if guardrails on people, it means guardrails on the rich and the wealthy and the empire builders. So they just start saying, look, we go into this area and we've converted people to monotheism. They're not believing in pagan gods anymore. Mind you, when I said about converting, from believing in the pagan gods to monotheism, that doesn't happen overnight. It takes thousands of years. Today, we don't really think much about the pagan gods, although there are still some faiths from religion people who do believe in that, in those thoughts. We generally do not. It seems very far removed, but it wasn't that long ago that people still were believing in that. And so they say, look, we've converted these people. So those areas where we've converted people to monotheism, those are no slaving zones. You can't go enslave those who have been converted. And that becomes a major constraint upon slavery. And the rich and powerful don't like this. It starts to cost them more money to get slaves than they are getting from slaves. So these no slaving zones compel areas of Eastern Europe and other parts of the world to stop enslaving people. So slavery goes into decline around the 10th century, the 11th century. But along now comes the Black Plague, and it becomes introduced into Rome. It comes from China, gets brought into Europe by way of Genghis Khan. You know, the invasions and fights that are going on from that were organized by Genghis Khan and his subsequent followers. They continue their battles with Europe, and through those fights come the Black Plague. So it's the second pandemic of the Black Death, 1347, 1351. And so I had, by the way, I had videos from YouTube that I was going to use, but I always have a backup. You never know if a video on YouTube isn't there forever. So all of these are gone, but if they come back and you want to go view them, they're available. I'm going to bring you, and I included some links in the PowerPoint that you've received that will take you to some programs. The BBC In Our Time program is really quite good about the Black Death, and I've given you a few others that you might want to look at. But with that, let's take a look at the Black Death.
A ticking bomb. It will bring this beautiful world crashing down.
Sound okay, Brad?
Trade routes opened by the Mongol Empire now encourage the spread of goods, people, and pestilence into the heart of Europe. Travelers on the road, peasants in the field, and even the daughter of the King of England are all speeding towards an inevitable encounter with the greatest killer in the history of mankind, the Black Death. At the end of the Mongol trade routes lies the port city of Kaffa on the Black Sea, starting point for merchant ships en route to Italy. In 1347, the Mongols attacked the Christian city of Kaffa, hoping to take this vital trade link for themselves. At first, it seems as if the town will fall to the relentless assault. But in the heat of hostilities, the Mongols suddenly confront a virulent new enemy, plague. It inspires them to launch a final desperate plan.
The Mongols got the plague and had to call off the siege. But before they left, they decided to catapult their dead corpses, the dead bodies of their victims, into the town in order to, quote, extinguish everyone inside and give the plague to their enemies. And apparently this is how the plague was communicated by the Mongols to Europeans.
It just may be the first incident of germ warfare in recorded history. While the story might be more legend than fact, the Mongol pestilence spreads to the townspeople of Kaffa.
The plague is fairly slow-moving for an epidemic disease. In 15 years, given the vast stretches of the steppe and the thinness of the population, would be about the right time to get it to Kaffa.
But while these facts seem clear, a mystery remains. After such a slow beginning, how does the plague spread to Europe so fast? Many historians believe it hitches a ride on merchant boats bound for Europe, and its first port of call is the island of Sicily. To the people of the shore and inlets of Italy, the waves have always delivered up the odds and ends of the Mediterranean storms. But this year, something different washes ashore.
Oh mio Dio! Andiamocene via! Andiamocene!
And in the towns, ships from the Black Sea sail into harbor, bearing something foul. Below decks, the Italians find a cargo of corpses. The few survivors are reported to have sickness clinging to their very bones.
Mio Dio, che male è questo?
When the townspeople realize the danger, they try to banish the plague ships from their harbor, but it is too late. The plague has already taken hold, and the dying begins. This is no ordinary illness. It is disgusting and painful. Its victims fall into terrible fever and dark despair.
Initially, it would have been difficult to tell the early symptoms of Black Death from a very heavy flu-like, what we would consider to be flu-like symptoms, and fevers, chills, and the high temperature. And then there would be a second stage where there would be development of the welts, the swelling of the buboes.
The bubo is a painfully enlarged lymph gland in the neck or groin. They become black and can swell to the size of an orange. It is these buboes that suggest bubonic plague may be the cause of the Black Death.
It's spread can be very, very rapid. It can cause septic shock. Your blood pressure will drop very rapidly. See multi-organ failure. The vascular system can become leaky, and you can have hemorrhaging. The buboes themselves are very, very painful. It's a very awful way to die.
Like pioneers in death, the people of the Sicilian town of Messina soon discover that this new disease is not only awful, but also highly contagious. It quickly spreads within families, sowing terror in every quarter.
This more or less struck out of the blue, and nobody had seen anything like this. So these people were like, they were like Columbus is in the land of mass death. That's just what they were like.
As the plague rages through the Sicilian town of Messina, the survivors have only one place to turn: the Holy Mother of God. Those still able to walk trek to her shrine 6 miles away and carry her back to the city.
Santa Madre, proteggici da questa malattia in nome di Cristo.
Despite their urgent pleas, the Virgin refuses to help them, according to the Italian chronicler Michele di Piazza.
The arrival of the statue profited nobody. The Messinese were so loathed and feared that no man would speak to them or be in their company, but hastily fled at the sight of them, holding his breath.
The visibility of the disease, it marks an individual out as having that disease, and that's very important in terms of creating a social stigma.
Though the Sicilians shun their Messinese neighbors, they cannot outrun the disease. The mark of sickness leaps across the island with startling speed, and the horror has just begun. Already other Genoese ships from Caffa are landing on the Italian mainland. They bear furs, textiles, and rats, all fine purveyors of death. Like an avenging angel, the plague will sweep across an unsuspecting continent as the apocalypse begins. Europe now faces the greatest threat ever known to mankind. Swift and deadly, it seems to come from nowhere and everywhere. As it reaches Italian shores, people are utterly defenseless. for medieval science is mired in a fog of superstition and ignorance. Guy de Chauliac is surgeon to Philip VI, King of France, as well as Pope Clement VI, who resides in Avignon, France. Renowned for his great intellect, he has been trained by the best physicians in Europe at the monastery in Montpellier. His techniques, like bleeding with leeches, are all designed to restore balance to the body.
There actually were medical theories about the balances of elements, about what kind of balance the body needs in order to stay healthy. And the plague, from a medical point of view, was seen above all as a reversal of all the normal balances.
Conveniently, an unusual alignment of planets directly precedes the outbreak. To the medieval mind, it is a logical explanation for the imbalance.
The conjunction of the three planets, Jupiter, Mars and Saturn, that created noxious vapors within the air. And it was these noxious vapors that interacted with the individual constitution that caused somebody to succumb to the plague.
This was the miasmatic explanation, or that the plague came from a miasma, an evil vapor. And I should emphasize that these explanations were not new. They were very old.
And so entrenched that it is almost impossible for the medical community to depart from this way of thinking. Away from the elite power centers of Avignon and Paris, in merchant towns like Geneva or Venice, common people have less elaborate theories about the source of the plague. They've been indoctrinated since birth to believe that, like all blessings, curses all ultimately flow from God.
So they died.
The death rates were so high that basically people's faith was shocked or rocked to the core. Many of the teachings they'd been given by the church didn't seem to give them any comfort or seem to be applicable to the situation. Everyone was dying. It didn't seem to make any sense.
The very fabric of society is unraveling, and no one seems to know how to weave it back together.
This was God's vengeance on humans for their wickedness and sin. What better way to respond to that than by an extraordinary penance that would take away that sin?
And so, in their terror, the people turn to religious zealots who whip themselves in a brutal imitation of Christ's own suffering. Their fanaticism will lead the crowds further into hysteria, persecution, and mass murder. By 1348, the Black Death has traveled from Sicily to England, carried in trade ships aboard the backs of rats. Already it has claimed the lives of millions. In every village, in every farm, the corpses pile up in staggering numbers, creating a new crisis: how to dispose of the dead.
If you lose 10% of 95,000 people, think about that. That's 10,000 people. How do you bury 10,000 people that have been lost in a very short period of time? Where do you find the people to take them? Where do you find the people where do you find the carts to take them?
The only people who were willing to carry away the dead were these very rustic, uncouth men or women who came down from the mountains or from the surrounding countryside, who were willing for very high fees to take away the dead and have contact with the dead.
700 years later, despite...
And so they're faced with this killer germ. They really don't understand it. They think they're being punished by God. And remember what I said, that when we transition from belief in pagan gods to belief in one God, that was attributed to Abraham, the son of Shem. That is the Hebrew faith. It is resisted. The people who believe in multiple gods fear that this movement to believe in only one God will anger the gods, who will then punish them, who will want to punish those who have believed in one God, but caught up in the sweep will be everybody else. What else could play out better than the Black Plague, than to have something that is invisible, that you believe is God's punishment, or the punishment of the gods? And so who better to blame than the Jews?
Like the trappings of authority.
All authority, medics, clerics, nobles, fail. And so the masses turn elsewhere for salvation. Along the Rhine region of Germany, the faithful decide to take matters into their own hands. They are known as the Flagellants. Fanatics who think they can win God's mercy by imitating Christ's bloody passion. Theirs is an extreme measure for an extreme time, and people flock to them in droves.
People looked upon the Flagellants as helping to ward off the disease, as perhaps their extraordinary penance might avert God's wrath and take away the plague.
The notion of flagellating oneself might have a particular appeal, a very dramatic method of, painful, dramatic method of scourging oneself of the sins in the expectation that you might not be alive tomorrow.
In groups as large as 1,000 men, the Flagellants commit themselves to a master for 33.5 days to mark their Savior's years on earth. Forsaking bath, bed, and sex, they piously march from city to city, performing gruesome masochistic acts before appreciative throngs. In his journals, the French chronicler Jean d'Yvennet writes,
"The penitents scourged themselves with whips of hard-knotted leather with little iron spikes. Some made themselves bleed very badly between the shoulder blades, and some foolish women had clothes ready to catch the blood and smear it on their eyes, saying it was miraculous blood."
Pope Clement VI, however, feels threatened by their growing influence.
The Flagellants were suspected by the organized religious establishment. Their coming to a place often created a lot of commotion, and sometimes it was accompanied by even movements against the town authorities or other groups. Religious reform, too.
As the plague progressed, one senses that all the institutions in medieval society, including most notably the church, were shown to be the plague showed them to be as powerless as, they were just like everyone else, as the poorest peasant.
This juggernaut will be hard to stop. The medieval masses are ready for a miracle, and the Flagellants seem ready to deliver.
That's what the flagellant processions and the sermons that attended them created. This moment of heightened, messianic, apocalyptic, now is the time expectations.
In 1348, A maelstrom of hate more vicious than even the Black Death itself erupts. Shock gives way to a witch hunt. Someone must be responsible for this catastrophe, and they should pay. In a torrent of hysteria and fear, the crowds target the helpless and innocent in a bloodbath of biblical proportions.
It may take expelling the Jews or even burning them.
The Jewish merchant Agamet has traveled through hundreds of miles, devastated by the plague. But ahead of him waits a greater horror, a bloodbath of epic proportions.
It's human nature, I suppose, to look for a scapegoat in times of crisis. Jews always seem to be the scapegoat, and in the Black Death they were as well.
For the Flagellants, it is an easy leap from criticizing the church to attacking the Jews. For to medieval Christians, no one offends God more.
There is a whole history of blood libels against the Jews, a whole history of persecution of the Jews by Christians during the Middle Ages.
Betrayed by his distinctive clothing which marks him as a Jew, Agamet is taken to town officials for questioning. He is not alone, according to 14th century chronicler Jean de Venette.
The infection and the sudden death which it brought were blamed on the Jews, who were said to have poisoned wells and rivers and corrupted the air.
Beim Beutel, den dir der Rabbiner gegeben hat. Was war denn eigentlich im Beutel drin?
Ich habe keinen
Lügner.
Keinen bekommen.
Lügner. Du hast Flüsse vergiftet, nicht wahr?
Ich schwöre.
Lügner. Lügner.
After hours of torture, Agamet breaks down. He falsely confesses that a rabbi did give him a pouch filled with venom, which he used to poison the wells.
They were forced to confess that no Jews are innocent. All Jews are guilty. They're all part of this conspiracy. No one can be cleared of these charges.
De Venette reports that confessions like Agamet's fly up and down the Rhine.
Accordingly, the whole world brutally rose against them. And in Jewish communities, many thousands were indiscriminately butchered, slaughtered, and burnt alive by the Christians.
What's poisoning us is the Jews' presence itself, that the Jews' presence is a moral failing. It's our sin to tolerate them, and this is what's bringing this punishment.
As Pope Clement VI pointed out at the time, Jews were dying in equal number to Christians, so it was fantastical to argue that Jews were poisoning people during the Black Death.
The Pope's pleas fall on deaf ears. On St. Valentine's Day, 1349, the citizens of Strasbourg round up as many as 2,000 Jews and burn them at the stake. The atrocity is repeated in more than 15 cities in Germany and Switzerland. The people of Europe have been poisoned, not by some insidious Jewish plot, but by fear, hate, and ignorance. The lethal combination is spinning out of control, even faster than the Black Death.
The correlation with our current world is kind of hard not to miss. events that were happening in the 1350s and events that have occurred within recent years. Certainly, we had the attack on 9/11. How did we respond to that? We knew who did it, even though we really weren't able to produce the evidence to prove it. We tortured people so we could extract confessions from them. Today, we're looking to try some of the people behind the 9/11 attack, but the problem we have is we really can't take it to court because the evidence we have was extracted by way of torture, and there's no credibility behind it. Torture someone long enough, they'll tell you whatever it is you want to hear or that they can discern that you want to hear. You have an invisible disease today, and how are we responding to that? We have people who are really infected with disinformation, and we see it play out on a fairly regular basis. But there's and I want to just take a look at that when we consider the let's have a look at this when we consider people like self-flagellation and how people react with anger. Let's have a look at today. Take a second to come up. See if I can get this here.
We begin tonight with a rise of attacks on local healthcare workers. Spectrum Health officials say they are seeing more.
Can't see anything, Sal. I can hear it.
Okay.
Doctors and nurses.
I thought that would
pandemic. 13
come up properly. I'll get it. Yeah. Okay, let me get over here. Stop that share. I thought it would pull up that screen.
Yeah, there was audio, but no visual.
Yeah, I get it.
Nearly 200 COVID-19
Do we have it?
patients
Okay.
in the hospital right now, and now more than ever.
We begin tonight with a rise of attacks on local healthcare workers. Spectrum Health officials say they are seeing more verbal and physical assaults on their doctors and nurses because of the pandemic. 13 on your side's Andrea Flores joins us now with details.
Juliet.
Well, maybe it won't come up. Sorry. Well, I won't get that. But what was, let me come back to this here. Okay, well, I lost that one. What we're seeing are attacks on healthcare workers because people, fed with disinformation that they believe, and they take it out on people that they shouldn't be taking it out on. Anyway, it is what happens when there is a frenzy. Let me say that from my world of security, what I would look at is what are threats to us and how do we protect against that. But in the process of looking at how we protect ourselves and what can happen, I would create plans to attack places, countries, institutions. And so I would work on plans. If we were to attack this, how would we do it? And the technique that I think scares everyone from my world, it is the biological and chemical attack, because they are invisible, and we know that we can cause panic, extensive fear. And when people are frightened, there's no telling what they will do. They will start attacking each other. We know that. It is a technique that we would use. And mind you, from the perspective of an adversary, my goal is to have people get killed. I don't care how they get killed. Doesn't mean our troops have to go and invade to kill them. If we can get them to kill each other, all the better, lower risk, right? So a tool that is very capable of creating mass hysteria is the introduction of a biological element. Not only do you kill them with the virus that you've introduced, but you can also agitate them to kill each other and turn on each other. The consequences of what happens, let me get up to that slide. The consequences of what happens out of the Black Plague is that it discredits the apparatus and the institution of religion. People have gotten angry with them. So it causes Christendom to fracture. What that means is that there's going to be another Christian force emerge over the next 100 years, beginning with Martin Luther and Protestantism. And so along comes a new faith institution. The Catholicism loses its following. Its ranks are depleted dramatically. And so it needs to start to rebuild its following. So you have two elements happening here. First is the Catholics want to rebuild. Protestantism wants to get its footing, and it wants to offer something for people to come and join their flock. The Protestants are saying, we're doing away with all those restrictions on how you handle slaves. We are going to bring deregulation, if you will. And so they're going to offer a new set of rules that the following will live by. The Catholics, they want to continue trying to convert people to bring them into their fold. Now, in the background, new technology has taken place. The latest iPhone 43 comes out, and Christopher Columbus is real interested in that, and he wants to use it. He has a new toy, and he wants to go out and play with it. And so Christopher Columbus gets to use his new navigation tools, and he opens up the so-called New World. And so what do you have coming into the New World? Not just Columbus as an invader, but two religious forces that are competing for power and have different agendas. The Catholics, what they do, Rome issues a papal bull. It is providing the legal, the spiritual foundation for Columbus to invade the New World, claim it for the crown that he's operating under, convert any of the peoples that they find there to Catholicism. And of course, if you find any Muslims, you can kill them. So the doctrine of discovery that is issued by the Vatican provides a legal, moral, spiritual foundation for Europeans invading lands that had been occupied for 20,000 years by the peoples who came here from Siberia. The people that today we call illegal immigrants. For the Protestants, they are coming and they are declaring Protestant supremacy. Here are lands that we can exploit. We want resources, we want more wealth, we want to feed our greed, and we can do it without the constraints that had been imposed by Christendom before the Black Plague, that had caused slavery to go into decline. And so new, dark, draconian slave codes will emerge in the West Indies under the heading of Protestant supremacy, which is first declared in Barbados, later transitioned to white supremacy. And so what happens now, we go through the Black Plague, we go through these changes that are taking place, And in the mid 1400s, 100 years after the Black Plague, slavery gets another mutation. It changes one more time. Traders from Portugal say to their African business partners, you want more of our stuff. What do you have that you can trade with us? And they say, hey, what about our slaves? We will trade you our slaves for your European stuff. And so the African slave trade emerges. And the first slaves from the African slave trade are arriving in Lagos, Portugal in 1445. Okay, now we can open up for, I know that's a lot of material to process. Hopefully nobody's offended by it, but that's, by the way, none of that were original ideas from me. They're only things that I've read about in books or heard other people lecture about. So with that, Brad, we can open for discussion.
Okay, I don't think we need to use the chat function. I think if you'll just, raise your hand, unmute yourself, we'll go from there. I was wondering how many people actually died from the Black Plague?
I forget the total number, but the estimate is half of Europe died.
Half of Europe, wow.
And mind you, what comes out of that is a severe labor shortage. Think of where we are today with COVID. What's one of our problems?
Yeah.
Severe labor shortage. So there's a subsequent power play between labor and management after the Black Plague.
Yeah, the more of these history classes I go through, nothing is new. I mean, nothing is new.
Yeah, I think it's, and what I find so fascinating is that when you dig deep into the roots of various phenomenon of history that we've known about, and you get into the roots, it now starts to make sense. I mean, I would say everything that seems to be, that's crazy. Why would they flagellate themselves? Well, there's a logic behind it. It may be founded on bad information. It may be wrong, all of that, but there is a logic. And when you discover that, you get to see what people are doing and why they're doing it. Doesn't make it right. It just helps to explain what they're doing.
Lori, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hi. I'm not a historian, but I'm finding this fabulous. And as you're talking about the Black Plague and its effects on so many different things, and then you end with Columbus going to the Americas. I know they brought smallpox, but did they also bring the plague? I don't seem to remember that. Did it? And if not, how did it die out? Just populations die out, so it didn't get passed on, or what was the story with that?
Yeah, that is what happens. As happens with viruses that go untreated, it just keeps killing the population until there aren't any humans for it to move to next. And it keeps mutating along the way. And it's like with COVID, we can expect it's going to keep mutating, certainly as long as it has a host people out there that it can feed upon. It'll keep finding them until there's none around it that it can go to. And that is what happens in Europe. The estimates vary. Some will get up to over 50% of the population killed. And the plague, we still don't have a vaccine for the plague, and it will every now and then emerge. But there were an assortment of diseases that came with the Europeans to the native population who did not have immunity from those diseases. I don't think the Black Plague was one that that had particular prominence. Yeah. And over certainly the past 4 weeks of the material we've gone over, any comments or reflections about that? You're certainly welcome to go into that as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sal. I have a comment. I've listened very carefully to your 4 presentations all 4 weeks, and of course, being a clergy person and studying a religion and being part of the religious aspect of society for all of my life, I bring a question to you about your statement today. God may have existed from the beginning, but within our species, it was not an idea in the early existence of humankind. I think that's speculation on their part, on your part. It may be that the sense of awe with the universe, the starry heavens, what's behind all this. We don't know how early in the history of human species, humankind, Homo sapiens, this notion of transcendence really emerged. So that's one thing I want to ask you. Maybe you have a comment about that. I have some other things I want to say.
Yeah. A lot of what I'm communicating would come from the work of Karen Armstrong and some others, but Karen Armstrong would be probably the number one of the people that I've read. And her point is that the human species sought transcendence from the very beginning. Why are we here? What else is there? You know, and the thoughts were thoughts about gods that were giving us sun and rain and wind, each of the gods of a thing. And she would communicate it as that they were transactional gods, that we would, pay homage to them so they would give us what we needed. And there's a fine line certainly between looking at individual gods providing us what is nature and believing in one God. But the stepping off point of God as the creator of everything and God is an omnipotent power, really, as she would argue, emerges with monotheism, and that is a major change in how we view God. So what I'm just saying is the human view of God, certainly, I'm talking broad generalities, there can be certainly exceptions to that, but the human view of God as I'm saying we think of God today emerges with Abraham and monotheism, and that transition then to, we don't need to make sacrifices, we need to follow the code, the moral behavioral standard, as opposed to sacrificing a lamb on the altar, that sort of thing.
I also want, and I don't want
but I'm sorry, that's it. But I wanted just to reemphasize, because I think that people can take what I'm saying to be that that it would disprove that God existed. That's not my point. Is that the idea of it may not have existed, but it comes into focus with Abraham.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate this discussion, but we need.
No, I'm interested. Yeah.
But the thing that fascinates me from one of your first lectures was the notion of hunter-gatherer as being forced into kind of an altruism. We need to do this together, as over against the more husbandry and agricultural thing where we can hoard, we can hold back, and we can give at our pleasure. it seems to me that the notion of altruism or doing good for others and wanting what's good for ourselves is a right and wrong that has persisted from the earliest records of Homo sapiens. And I don't know if we can really identify where it started or where it proliferated, but I think in every religion that I have studied, there's the notion of what's good for me, self-centeredness, me first, as somehow bad or wrong, as over against I have to somehow give myself away for the betterment of others, and that yin yang, that back and forth goes throughout all of history. And I thank you for what you've brought to our attention these last 4 weeks.
Well, thank you, John. And let me, an author who I like a great deal is Franz de Waal. That's his last name, W-A-A-L, Franz de Waal. And he studies chimpanzees, bonobos, and the ape family, if you will. And he has written extensively about the that when he looks at our ancestors, our predecessors, they're not all good and they're not all bad. What he wants to highlight is that compassion exists within them. The idea of altruism exists within that population. And so, and he shows evidence of that. He also can show evidence of the aggression, so he's saying we humans, we kind of follow the same stuff that our ancestors did. And even I was reading one of his things recently, and he gives as an example another researcher who set up a test for people, and it was. Maybe forgive me if I get this somewhat wrong, but it was incest between a brother and a sister, and the researcher constructed this thing for a group of people, and what he presented is this hypothetical that there's a one-night stand between a brother and a sister. Is that right or wrong? And people say, well, it's wrong because you can have deformed children and all of that. And he says, well, but they use protective sex. So that negates that thing that would be wrong. And so each time they come up with something that would be wrong, he throws in another element, says, you see, no, they got past that too. And in the end, this audience says, it doesn't matter, it's just wrong. And his point is that even on our gut level, our intuition on many things is for a moral judgment about what is right and wrong. So he's saying is that that's just one of the things that is built in, and he sees that as well, something that comes from what we would call the animal kingdom, the mammal kingdom, that is part of who we are. And he makes the argument that people will say, well, it's human nature to be greedy. And he makes the argument, no, it isn't. If our human nature is to be kind, compassionate, and doing things for others, even when we don't benefit. I watched a film the other day. I'm getting that age now where the words escape me. It's not Imposters, it's Invisibles, and it's on Amazon. And it's about World War II, and it's about the Holocaust. And it's about people who weren't Jewish and helped hide Jewish people in Germany at great risk to themselves, and did it with nothing to get in return. I think that is exemplary of really who we are overall. I think we're also capable of doing horrible things like the Holocaust. But it's important to see that we're not all one. You know, I think our nature is much more loving and giving. Thank you, John. Yeah.
Henry, did you have a question or comment?
Well, yeah, I was Saul. I was wondering, you know, with all the change that humans have experienced from the beginning up through what you've covered, has human nature really stayed exactly the same?
Well, you know, I'll tell you and I'm giving you my guess. This is my guess. Is that the discovery of agriculture opened up a path that some humans, not all of them, because remember, it's a small percentage that were those who wouldn't share, but it opened a path towards greed. And over time, we have come to normalize it. We have come to honor it. In some cases, we've come to worship it. And most importantly, we have become more sophisticated at it. I'm working on a class now, which is about propaganda and psychology. And what we have is the public relations industrial complex emerged in the 20th century, and it has reached a level of sophistication by bringing together psychology and algorithms to dig into our brain and manipulate it in untold ways. So I think we as people, again, I have to turn off the news because that only shows me the exceptions to what's going on in the world. People will think that the news is a window onto the world. It's just exceptions. So if I look at the world as a whole, and certainly the people of our nation state, we are far more loving and giving than not. But those of great power have more sophisticated tools than we could ever have imagined, and it scares me. I don't know if that's a good answer or not, Henry.
Well, it does suggest that there may be changes to human nature based on the environmental factors.
Might be, yeah. But what amazes me is our ability to retain our compassion for others. You know, invariably, when we have some catastrophic event, we'll see people do extraordinary things for others. Anecdotally, it's the one that just to me was the microcosm of how I view it. I remember the World Series when there was the earthquake in San Francisco. Most of you are too young to remember that. I was around then. Okay, and here was the bridge in San Francisco that had collapsed, and there was a white person in there who was trapped. And this black guy comes off of the street, climbs up the bridge, gets up there, and he extracts the person. And I said, you know, with all that we have going on, you know, you would say that wouldn't happen. But those things become, you know, the color of the skin and all of that becomes meaningless when we see another human being in trouble. That's, I think, really who we are, and it's the small percentages who can get great power, who, you know, get a lot of attention and should get attention. But I mean, I don't think it tells the story of all of us.
Sal,
go ahead.
You've taken us on quite a journey over the last 4 weeks, from
the cradle of civilization to perhaps the extinction of civilization as we know it. And obviously the journey's not over.
Yeah.
And you've seen a lot, you've read a lot, much more than the rest of us, but you've also, I think, enlightened us to not only understand the past, but be interested in what's happening now. What gives you hope?
Oh, what gives me hope really is are our ancestors. We come from an ape family that is willing to brawl it out, is willing to have the alpha male duke it out on the street, but is also capable of enormous kindness. We as a species have the ability to love. We have that ability.
Right.
And I don't ever want to lose sight of that. That's not to look, I mean, you know, I know what it's like to get angry and hate something and all of that. But I also know that I have to reset my button every now and then by reminding myself that if I don't love, who am I?
And
I think that really is a question for all of us. Right. And I believe in it.
Yeah. Well, and along with the love, if you look at all the atrocities and all the blame and finger pointing that goes on, it's also a matter that we have the capacity to forgive.
Yes. Oh no, right. And that is one of the most difficult things for me, I think, in my life, is to forgive. I kind of feel like I can forgive, but I'm also protective of myself, that if I think you're going to hurt me, I may forgive you for hurting me before, but I'm going to try to not let you get into another position to pick up a bat and smash me over the head.
That sounds like our national security position.
It's just, it's, you know, and look, you know, just talking about raising the ideas of national security, remember, we came very close to the brink of a nuclear catastrophe. And a Russian in a system that was intolerant of anybody making a decision that countered what were the official orders said, I don't believe what it says on our radar. I'm not firing the weapons.
Yeah.
And he stopped it. I mean, this is somebody who is really worthy of great honor and respect for the courage that he showed. Right. And there's many people who, in the face of great power, find their courage and risk it all in the end. Yeah.
Well, but I think you've also kind of suggested to us the role that each of us play, even though we may feel powerless. It all starts with each of us too.
Yeah, look, I'm a believer in education, in people becoming cognizant of things that they might not have been aware of before, and start to put the pieces together, and become resistant to those forces that are there to agitate you, to provoke you to hate. You know, look at those people who are attacking healthcare workers. I mean, what? They're threatened. Those forces that want to provoke people to attack healthcare workers, they are threatened by people who want to do good for all of us, and we need to recognize that. Now, one of the other things I want to make sure I don't forget, because this line I worked on over the weekend. When you watch those people flagellating themselves, I know that that's not new to you folks from Michigan, because you have a lot of Detroit Lions fans out there.
Ouch.
I know. I thought, how am I going to sneak that in? But I was going to find a way, one way or the other.
Val, you haven't read our rules on civil discourse and a half.
Remember now, I am from Atlanta, so I share your pain.
Oh, terrific. Any other questions?
I don't have anything in the chat. I would check.
Okay. Well, as Ben just said, it's been quite a ride for 4 weeks. It's been enormously entertaining. It's been mind expanding, and I've looked forward to each and every one of these. I thank all of you for coming to the class, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Sal, thank you very much.
Thank you
I really
so
enjoyed it
much.
very much myself. Thanks.
Yeah.
Be safe, everybody, and please be careful. Yeah.
We appreciate it so much. And I have to say that I brought up your name numerous times since your class has started and talked about the content. And even though sometimes I can't pay attention to the whole class because I'm working, we do appreciate it.
Thanks.
Everything you've done. And Brad, thank you. Everybody have a nice afternoon. I'll go ahead and end class. And Sal, if you have any follow-up, just let us know. Otherwise, we hope to see you again.
Great. Thank you.
Sal, I'll be in touch with you.
Okay. Be safe,
Okay.
everybody.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
Take care.